And today we're going to be thinking about the subject of leadership. And so today's talk is entitled, Did You Know You're a Leader? Did you know you're a leader? And we're going to be thinking about the question, what makes a truly good leader? See, we live in a world that esteems leadership, authority, and being in charge. Yet at the same time, we are constantly and consistently seeing leaders publicly fail and fall. Feels like over the past years, we've been constantly seeing or hearing about leaders, celebrities, and public figures who have had to step down from their role or apologize for something that they've said or done that wasn't befitting of their position. And so, how we lead well is an incredibly important subject for us to think about. I like what American pastor Andy Stanley says on the subject of leadership. He says that one of the greatest indicators of our own personal maturity is what we do with power and influence. One of the greatest indicators of our own personal maturity is what we do with power and influence. How we respond when it dawns on us that we're the most powerful person in the room. And so, with that in mind, we're going to seek to answer the question, what makes a truly good leader? But before we get into it, I want to address this. That I know that for some of you sat there, you may be thinking, that sounds fine and well there, Pete, but I'm not a leader. I wouldn't call myself a leader. And if that's you this morning, I want to very gently and respectfully say to you, I think you're wrong, actually. I think you're mistaken. Because there is a very real sense in which leadership is not about a title or a position. It is actually about influence. It's not about title, it's about influence. And the reality is that even if you've never had or never have the title, the job description, or an obvious position of authority, for every single one of us, we do have a sphere of influence. In other words, there are people in our lives who are influenced by how we live, the things we say, and how we treat them. And so when it comes to the subject of leadership, it's not really a question of whether you want to be a leader or not. It's really more about what kind of leader you're going to be within your sphere of influence. And it's a slightly scary question to contend with in some ways because, as we've already looked at, leaders fall and fail. Some of you will be familiar with the old saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's this idea that a person's sense of morality can lessen as his or her position of power increases. And we see it all the time. Yet when Jesus spoke to his disciples about authority, he had some interesting things to say. In fact, when he was speaking to them, he compared this worldly way of leading against a godly model for leadership. And he said to his disciples of this worldly way of leading, it will not be this way with you. It will not be this way with you. I'm going to show you a new way, a different way, a godly model for leadership, a way that is rooted in humility, service, and saying no to ourselves so that we can say yes to others. Which leads us to a story from the Old Testament, a story from the life of King David. And it's a story I want us to focus on from from 1 Samuel in the Old Testament. And if you're new to exploring faith, the Old Testament is kind of the first 2/3 of the Bible, the bit before Jesus hits the scene. And the background for this story is that David has been on the run from this guy called Saul. Saul is currently king of Israel, but he has essentially been overtaken by a spirit of jealousy, bitterness, and hatred towards David, who had previously been in his service. And David has been forced to go on the run from Saul, who is seeking to hunt him down and kill him. But God is against Saul, and he's for David. And in chapter 24 of the book, we see this really interesting story where Saul and his army are hunting David. And as they're hunting David, a situation arises. For want of a better term, nature calls Saul. And Saul decides, men, you wait here. I need a moment in private to go and relieve myself. Nature has very literally called Saul. And I kind of love this about the Bible, that it records these very kind of ordinary, seemingly arbitrary, everyday, normal things. As I was reading this, it made me think of the TV program 24. Do people remember 24 at all? So 24, for those of you who don't have a context for it, it was this series about a special agent called Jack Bauer, who he was part of the kind of counterterrorism unit in the States. It's fictional, obviously, but he basically there were 24 episodes in a series, and each episode would depict 1 hour of the 24-hour day, and so it was kind of a day in the life of a secret agent in real time. That was the premise of the show. Now, obviously, it's very Hollywood, it's very American, lots of action, lots of explosions, lots of him being quite invincible, no matter how high the odds were stacked against him. But one of the things I noticed, having watched 7 or 8 series of 24, is that Jack Bauer never goes to the toilet. Not once. He never goes to the loo. You never have a scene, not even one scene where he walks out of a restroom. Not one. He is either holding it in because he's so intensely motivated by his job, or he just is the most dehydrated spy in America. But he never goes to the loo. And anyway, without wanting to give you guys an undesirable mental image, Saul in this story, he enters into the cave to take care of business. And I love that the Bible records these kinds of little details. It just makes it real. But as he was kind of set away from his men in the cave, David has this opportunity to sneak into the cave and basically attack him while he's vulnerable. David has this chance to pay Saul back for every wrong thing that he has been the victim of during his time of fleeing and hiding in the wilderness. And those around David are kind of egging him on. They're saying, this is the day the Lord spoke of when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. They're saying to David, this is our chance to take Saul off the board. No more fleeing, no more running, no more hiding in the wilderness. We can rid the earth of Saul, and you can take up your rightful place by replacing him as king of Israel. But as the opportunity arises, David's conscience kicks in. And he says this, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord. With these words, David sharply rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. So, really weird situation, right? But what's actually happening at the heart of the thing? Well, essentially, David is refusing to do a bad thing to get a good outcome. In other words, David is refusing to violate the will of God to receive the blessing of God, which to me just screams integrity, doesn't it? In a sense, this is what integrity is. I refuse to do a bad thing to get a good outcome. I refuse to violate the will of God to receive the blessing of God. He's refusing to enact violence against Saul to bring about victory. As the story continues, the text says this, David went out of the cave and called out to Saul, my lord the king. Why do you listen when men say David is bent on harming you? This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lay my hand on my Lord, because he is the Lord's anointed. See that there is nothing in my hand to indicate I'm guilty of any wrongdoing or rebellion. I've not wronged you, but you are hunting me down to take my life. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done to me. But my hand will not touch you. As the old saying goes, from evildoers come evil deeds. So my hand will not touch you. Saul hunted David, hated David, desired the demise of David without any just cause, not one. And what is David's response? He says, even if you continue to wrong me, I will not wrong you. He made the decision, I trust God to deal with this, and I will not violate the will of God to receive the blessing of God. And there's tremendous faith, trust, and humility in that. Because he's essentially saying, I don't need to try and make a path for myself. Instead, I'm trusting God with the road ahead. See, instead of saying, my will be done, and trying to create that path for himself, he declares God's will, God's way, and God's timing. I don't need to try and force it. If God wills me to be king, I will be king, but it will be his will, his way, and his timing. And I think this is one of the reasons why God was with David and against Saul. Because where Saul said, my will be done, David said, God's will be done. Where Saul said, I will cling to power, David said, I will cling to God. And where Saul said, I'm going to make it happen in my timing, David said, I'll trust God to make it happen in his. See, this kind of fight, this battle that's being depicted and described, this conflict, it's not just Saul versus David. In many ways, this is pride versus humility. And I think this is where the rubber really meets the road with this. See, leadership, influence, impact, however you want to describe and think about this, at its core, it's really all about stewardship. Because whether we've been placed in a situation where our authority or influence is little or large, it really doesn't matter. The question is, how are we going to be good stewards over what God has given us to do, over the people in our lives and with the influence we have? Now, Jesus himself, he speaks about these things. He says, if we're honorable, if we're faithful with little things, God will increase that opportunity, that responsibility. We want to be good stewards in all of these things. I think one of the most important things we need to do is nurture an attitude of humility. And I know how important this is because I've experienced firsthand how pride can knock you off course if you'll allow it. I know some of you will have heard me tell this story before, particularly those of you who were involved in the Enable course the year before last. But I want to share it again as I know that some of you won't have heard it. And actually, this is a really important story from my life in terms of thinking about, in terms of shaping how I think about this issue. But a few years back, I remember chatting to a very sweet and kind older woman. I was working as a community worker for a church at that time. And she knew what I did. She knew I was a Christian. And she said to me, I've got a question for you about your faith, if that's okay. And I, of course, said, well, I live for this stuff, so fire away. And over the course of the next couple of minutes, she proceeded to ask me a number of different questions about the subject of cremation. And I didn't do a good job of thinking through why she was asking me. I think the pride kicked in, and instead of humbly listening and thinking and trying to hear her to understand what she was actually saying, I proudly launched into what was probably a 5 or 10 minute monologue on the subject of cremation that contained everything I knew about it. I said, from my understanding of the Bible, there's no reason why it would be a problem to be cremated. I talked about how Jesus would kind of raise us up to new life on that final day, but that actually this is about a spiritual relationship with Him and not dependent on the physical body. And so I said to her, I don't think it would be an issue to be cremated if that was somebody's wish. Anyway, the conversation ended abruptly as she said to me, okay, that's good. We don't need to worry about that then. And she moved on. And it seemed a bit strange to me that it ended so abruptly, but I just thought to myself, hopefully God will make something out of that. Anyway, about half an hour later, she was showing me some photos that she'd been organizing. And as we went through some of them, we came across this one photograph of a really beautiful garden. And I noticed on one of the photographs of this garden that there was this sort of concrete stand and it had this beautiful vase on the top. And I said to her, that's a beautiful vase. And she said to me, yes, it is. It's actually where my son's ashes are kept. And I don't expect I will forget that moment because it felt like someone just whacked me right between my lungs and all the air shot out of my body. As it dawned on me, this cold wave of realization came over me as I realized she wasn't asking me about cremation. She was asking me about her boy. She was asking me about her kid. I think she was probably asking me where he is now. See, what she was looking for was someone to comfort her in her distress and to give her some hope. And I missed the opportunity to do that because pride was driving. I missed the opportunity to comfort her because when she asked me the question, I didn't stop and humbly think about why she was asking. Instead, pride took over and I just hurried into this lengthy monologue to try and show her how clever I am and to talk about all the things I know on the subject. And it may seem like an odd story or example to share, but the reason I want to share it within this talk is that I think this is what pride does to us. In situations big and small, it tempts us to make the situations we're in all about us and not about those around us. And this is exactly what happens with King Saul. He allows his pride to take the wheel. And as a result, he takes his eyes off of the kingdom that he's been given authority over. And instead, he makes it all about himself. Instead of saying, David's victories within my service are good for the kingdom and good for the people of Israel, he says, David's popularity is bad for me. So David's got to go. But good leaders, godly leaders, whether in big situations or seemingly small conversations, they choose humility and they put others first. I think culturally we're in a weird moment where many of us probably think about authority as being a negative thing or a bad thing or something that we don't like particularly. But my personal opinion on this is that that's a little bit misguided. That actually, I don't personally think authority is either good or bad. I think it's just authority. What makes it good or bad is how the person uses it. It's not that authority is good or bad, it's that good authority is good and bad authority is bad. And as I alluded to earlier, when Jesus spoke about authority, he looked at this worldly and crooked way of leading, these examples of bad authority, and he said to his disciples, it will not be this way with you. We're going to do this differently. See, the old way, the worldly way, was humanity getting in a mess by trying to seize power and control things. But you know what's so beautiful about the gospel? So beautiful about the person of Jesus is that his response to the mess that humanity finds itself in is not to clean up the world by seizing power, but instead to clean it up by serving the powerless. It is a countercultural, upside down kingdom. Jesus' response to cleaning up the mess of our world is not to seize power, it is to serve the powerless. Jesus gives us a new way. He says, we're going to say no to ourselves so that we can say yes to others. As we come into close, I want to encourage you to think for a moment about the word minister. Nowadays, we tend to think about that word as a job title. Maybe we think about it as a pastor or a priest or a politician or something like that. But interestingly, the root of the word in Latin actually means servant. It's why in the UK we have a prime minister, because that person is supposed to be the prime servant, the person who serves the most. Now, obviously, that idea has gotten a bit lost in terms of modern politics, but that was the original idea behind the thing, that the person with the most power should be the person most willing to serve. And I wonder where we would get an idea like that. Maybe from the one who said of himself, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." And these sentiments are beautifully expressed in the fact that on Jesus' last night on earth, the night before he would go to the cross and give his life as a ransom for many, he was humbly washing the feet of his friends as an act of service, humility, and loving kindness, demonstrating that heart of a servant. He's given us a model to follow. And part of my role here, part of my job here is that I want to raise up leaders. There's a lot of reasons for that, but one of the main ones is that if I am a leader who is a control freak and needs to be involved in every single thing we do as a church, I will end up being a bottleneck for the amount of ministry we're able to do. I will end up being a bottleneck for the amount of people we're able to help. I don't want to be the kind of leader where everything goes through me. That's not what I'm called to do. I'm called to raise up leaders so that we can lead together. And as I have said, I think you are all leaders. If I end up being a control freak where everything needs to go through me, I will restrict the output of this church because I have only a certain amount of hours in the week. Thankfully, that is not what I've walked into here at Greenfinch. We have Linda, who's, look at her right now, she's very faithfully writing our Connect notes for the week. She's using her skills, her gifts to lead and to serve and to help. That's brilliant. We have Janet, Donna, Pet, and Karen who've been part of organising some of the brilliant events we've had recently and putting many more in the calendar for the year ahead. We've got a barn dance here on Saturday, and they are using their gifts and their skills and their talents to be part of leading us as a church. We've got the fantastic Cameo team that works so hard to create these wonderful and relaxed environments for people to enjoy through the week. We've got James and his brilliant team of community workers that are taking on the community cafe on a Thursday morning and the Friday night youth club for us on a Friday night. These guys are all leaders. And we're always in need of new leaders. I'd love us to have someone here in the church who's able to head up and be a leader in regards to prayer meetings. I'd love us to have a team of people who could take on running something like Alpha so that people have an outlet to be able to come and explore what faith in Jesus looks like. Ultimately, any way in which people might say, "Hey, do you know what? I think I could do this. I think I could be involved in this. I think I could help here." Hey, if that's you, please do come and chat to me. I would love to have a conversation about what it might look like for you. That's not you signing up for anything if you're not sure you want to do it, but it might just be a really useful conversation to have to see if God might be putting something on your heart that we could do here at Greenfinch to honor Him and to bless our community. I really want to raise up leaders. And if you have something in your heart that's telling you, I could do this, please do come and chat to me in the coming weeks. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to help you figure out what God might be calling you to do here on this estate and beyond. As a close, I want to ask the question, how do we take what we've looked at this morning and turn it into something practical and helpful come tomorrow morning? The answer to that question inevitably will be different for each one of us and our contexts. And so I want to encourage you to be thinking about this prayerfully, as well as in conversation with those who know you best. Hear that carefully, those who know you best. As a starting point, I want to encourage us to ask God, Lord, would you help me daily to choose humility over pride, others over self, integrity over victory, and service over authority. Humility over pride, others over self, integrity over victory, and service over authority. Because that is the Jesus way. That's the model He's given us. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you so much that you call us to be leaders. You call us within those little spheres of influence to be faithful, to be honorable, to be reflections of your love and your character and your goodness. And that you call us to be leaders in those spaces. We so often attach all kinds of other stuff to that word, but ultimately it's about influence and stewardship. Are we willing to be faithful in the places that we find ourselves so that you can work through us? Are we willing to be humble, to say, God, it's your will, it's your way, it's your timing? Father, please help each one of us to know how you are leading, how you are guiding, where those areas are in our lives where you consider us a leader. And would you help us to be people who don't allow that to ever go to our heads, but instead to be people who will honor you in that position? Father, thank you for your faithful love. Please help us to follow you and to honor you in all that we do. We love you and give you praise, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen.